Author Donna J. Jodhan presents The Christmas Box Set Number 2. If you have not yet listened to Donna's 12 Days of Christmas Box Set Number 1, then you owe it to yourself to do so. This box set is made of 12 wonderful stories for the Christmas holiday season. They are all filled with mystery, suspense, and they all have happy endings. Now, Donna presents her second 12 Days of Christmas box set, 12 stories with wild imaginings. Donna paints pictures of hope, peace, and a bright future for the world. She develops amazing stories that will warm and thrill the hearts of the listener. Sit back now and enjoy Donna's 12 stories. You can email your thoughts and feedback to Donna at donnajodhan@gmail.com. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone.
Ho, 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 everybody. I'm author Donna Jodhan, also known as Detective DJ. And I sincerely hope that everybody is enjoying this wonderful holiday season, greeting each other with peace, with love, with joy, sharing all kinds of things with each other. And now it is time for me to introduce to you the third episode of my 12 Days of Christmas box set. I have already shared with you the first two episodes, and I'll give you the names of them again. The first episode was Santa's Special Christmas Sleigh was the first episode, and the second episode was the President's Christmas Packages. I hope that you had time to sit down, relax, and listen to them. And now it is time for me to introduce to you the third episode of my Christmas box set. This one is called Santa's Super Christmas Kids. And here is a description. And Santa has been working on this special mission for some time now, and he has enlisted the aid of his special kids. And he needs them to accomplish this mission. He has set out to do something very different for this year, because this is what Santa does every year. He always tries to find something different to do. Yes, indeed. So, there are some evil ones who are always plotting to try and thwart Santa's missions. But at the end of the day, they always fail, because Santa is a very smart guy. And for this year, his super kids are going to help him. He's not going to allow anyone to thwart this mission. Find out how Santa uses his special powers to overcome all adversity. And his super kids are all on hand to see it all happen. All right, so here we go. Part 1. Santa assembles his super kids for a special mission. Santa has always wanted kids from around the world to help him at Christmas time. And after a year of dealing with a very bad back and a broken leg, it believes that this is the perfect year for him to do this. He sustained his bad back while skiing with his reindeer in early January. And then, to add insult to injury, he broke his leg while skydiving with his friends and family in Hawaii in the spring of this year. And his bad back had just about healed, but then came the broken leg. So, for the past few months, he has been recuperating and recovering. But this has not stopped Santa from drawing up a special mission for this year. And Mrs. Claus have spent very long days putting this mission together. And now they feel that they have one to put into action. This mission will be all about kids helping kids. First off, Santa visits his special school for kids, and it's a special school where students learn how to do some very special and exciting things. Unique things and things that will be always remembered. Santa established this special school several years ago, and his students are carefully chosen from around the world. Them and their parents are invited to stay with Santa and Mrs. Claus for 16 months. They arrive in September of one year and remain at school until the December of the following year. So it's 16 months at Santa's school. During their first December, the kids participate in a special Christmas mission. They get to watch the seniors at work on their mission, and they get to participate in it to some extent. Then in January of the following year, it is their turn to get ready for their mission the following December. So the first December, they get to watch the seniors participate in their mission before they leave school. And then in January, they get to start training for their mission. Here is where they get to shine. During the year, the kids are trained rigorously. They train hard, but they also have lots of fun while their parents look on. But they are not allowed to interact with their kids while they are being trained at Santa's school. Santa has made very sure to make the days of the kids as normal as possible, just as if they are actually at home. They wake early, eat with their parents, and then say goodbye for the day. And they return in the mid-afternoon to their parents and spend the rest of the day with their parents. There are after-school activities where the kids bond with each other, and on the weekends there are outings and field trips for both parents and kids, and anyone can participate. Sundays are rest days. The parents are allowed to interact with other parents and families while their kids are at school, and they can even work remotely if they choose. But it is all heavily supervised and security is extremely tight. Parents can either decide to leave their jobs outright, and Santa will ensure that they find employment when they return to their home, or they can choose to take a leave of absence, and Santa will again help them to regain their jobs when they return home. Here is where Santa would use his special powers to make all of this happen. No worries, because Santa and his legal team has worked very hard to make sure that all of this will happen, that everything is above board and very legal. And by the time the kids and parents return to their homes, they barely remember what has taken place over the last 16 months. Of course, parents and kids could opt out of Santa's school at any given time, and Santa will send them safely back to their homes. Santa chooses kids who are deserving of a chance to shine. Those kids who are less fortunate and come from troubled homes, or kids from those parts of the world where there are wars, starvation, and poverty. For this year, Santa is going to work with some very special students who have unfortunately lost their parents, and now they have become orphans. There are the same number of little girls and little boys at the school. Santa's special scouts, Reindeer Frosty and Misty, dolphins Sequin and Sea Jade, snowbirds Snowcone and Snowflake, and lambs Raindrop and Rainbow, scouted these special kids, and Santa did the rest. Reindeer Frosty and Misty scouted their kids from the Ukraine and Poland, choosing kids who had lost their parents either to war or that the kids and parents had become separated when Russia invaded the Ukraine, and kids and parents were inadvertently separated when they entered Poland. These are the kids that were chosen. Several times the reindeer were almost killed by Russian soldiers, but they were well-trained scouts, with Frosty and Misty always covering each other's backs. And they had done their scouting very, very well. And Santa had brought these kids to the school through the back channels, using specially equipped sleighs to transport these kids. Dolphins Sequin and Sea Jade, acting as scouts, had chosen their kids from the beaches of Cuba, choosing kids who had no parents and who had been making a living through horrible means. The dolphins had used their special skills to bring their chosen kids to the beaches, making sure that no one saw them. And from there, Santa had taken care of the rest, using special sea sleighs to do the transporting. Then we had Rainbow and Raindrop, two of Santa's scouts, lambs, being used to scout their kids. And they had chosen their kids from the fields and meadows of Afghanistan. First, they played with the kids who they discovered had had no parents. And then Santa had used his special sleighs to transport these little kids to his school. Snowcone and Snowflake had had lots of fun with their scouting assignment. They had traveled quite a bit more to choose their kids. They had visited several countries around the world, scouted many kids, and these kids were less fortunate. And then they had chosen those with no parents. Santa had to use several ways to transport the kids, from special sleighs outfitted with special gadgets to special invisible suits for the chosen kids, and finally special suits for his scouts, so that they would not be discovered or injured. Everything had been well coordinated, and Santa had had help from his best buddies, Marco and Nicholas, who had helped to develop the gadgets and suits that Santa had needed in order to fulfill the initiative. So that was the scene at this present time. Part 2. Santa employs some special tutors. Now it was time for Santa to put his initiative into action. All was set, and there were special dorms waiting for the kids upon their arrival, all decked out with the finest facilities. But Santa had also made very sure to ensure that these kids were not going to be spoiled rotten. He had employed special language tutors to help the kids learn how to communicate with each other. He had had round-the-clock nurses and doctors to take care of flus, coughs, and colds, and any other medical emergencies. And the reindeer, headed by Rudolph, had given the kids singing lessons almost every day, and other reindeer had taught them how to drive sleighs, navigate large areas of the world, and maneuver the sleighs in tight spots, drop parcels in specific homes, and how to use special gadgets in emergencies, such as bad weather, rough seas, or any other type of emergency. So the training was very, very intense and thorough. The kids had attended fitness classes daily, but for most of them, their favorite part of the training consisted of learning how to do such things as how to do air acrobats, play hockey in the air, and play soccer in the air, play air basketball and air skate. Those were their favorite activities. And how to race against the stars. Oh wow. The kids also loved the sea trailing classes. They learned how to drive sleighs on the surface of the sea, how to surf rough waves, okay, that was very important, and how to sea skate, and how to play sea games. Oh wow. The kids were divided into two specific groups. One for driving sleighs by sea and the other for driving sleighs by air. But both groups also had to learn how to operate the sleighs while on land. Santa and Mrs. Claus were the kids' favorite tutors, especially Mrs. Claus, who taught the kids how to package and hand out Christmas goodies. They also taught the reindeer, who taught them all the air activities. The dolphins, who taught them the sea skills, and the snowbirds, who taught them how to use their special gadgets. Truth be told, most of these kids were not too keen on singing classes, but Santa insisted that they should learn. And in time, they learned how to enjoy these singing lessons, play the harp, and play the violin. The kids also loved the lambs, who taught them how to prance and dance. Yes, they loved their little lambs, and they also learned from the lambs how to run like the wind. Kids and lambs became very close friends, and for the most part, every single kid was simply mesmerized and awestruck to be at Santa's special school. They simply did not have much time to miss their lost parents. And as they laughed, smiled, and made friends with each other, and ate and drank so many different goodies. But there were moments when a kid would grow sad, and they would miss their homeland and cry quietly for their missing parents. But Santa, Mrs. Claus, and Rudolph were always on hand to comfort these little guys. One time, one of the kids fractured their ankle, and another time, another kid came down with measles, and yet another time, one of the kids broke their arm. But Santa's medical team took care of things, and said kid was soon back to normal. These were all special kids being taught by special tutors. From Santa and Mrs. Claus to reindeer, dolphins, snowbirds, and lambs. Just enough time for some sleep after a long day of happy training. And Santa always marveled whenever these kids got up to their funny tricks and antics and their little pranks that they would occasionally play on each other, or even sometimes try on their tutors. And this was how it was at this present time. Part 3. Secret Guests and Special Gadgets. By the end of August, the kids were almost ready for their very special Christmas mission. But Santa had not really told them very much about this mission. Some of the older kids had begun to wonder and speculate, but neither Santa nor Mrs. Claus nor the tutors would tell them anything. On September the 1st, some very special guests arrived to start getting the kids ready. And they were there to help them get ready to learn how to use their special gadgets. And suspense was high in the air. On that evening, the kids were introduced to their very special gadgets and their very secret guests. Before now, the kids had been told about these very special guests in passing, and the kids were told about some of the gadgets that these guests had developed for Santa over the years. But none of these kids had ever expected to meet these guests in person. The lights were bright as the kids took their places, their faces filled with expectation and wide smiles. And then the lights were lowered just before the special guests were introduced. There on stage were Santa's very close friends, Marco Sumner, Santa's very special friend, President Marco Sumner, his very close friend, Nicholas Gleason, Santa's very special friend, and Marco's eldest son, Little Nick. They were going to be here for about a month. And during that time, they would be teaching the kids how to use some very high-powered gadgets that they had developed for this mission. The kids were completely silent, and their attention was complete as each gadget was introduced and a short description given. The kids were especially intrigued when Nicholas was introduced, and he told them that he was vision impaired and that he had developed some very special gadgets using braille and voice features. As the kids would later discover that Marco and Nicholas, with Little Nick as their tester, had developed gadgets with braille, voice, and mainstream input and output. For the next 2 hours, Marco and Nicholas gave live demos of each of these gadgets. And after a short break, the kids were split into groups, and they were told that for the next month, they would receive specific training as required. None of these kids slept very much that night, as memories of those very special gadgets danced in their dreams. And many of these kids dreamed of being able to talk directly with Marco and Nicholas. And they were all eager to get started the next day. That is, after they were served an extra special breakfast. Yummy, delicious, and so very filling. Santa had decided that the 3 vision-impaired kids in the group would receive special training from Nicholas, where they would learn how to use the communications control panel and console using braille as a means to communicate, alongside electronic input and output, while a few were chosen to work with Marco on voice input and output gadgets. The entire group was also trained on emergency gadgets such as how to determine weather forecasting. It was all about learning how to do weather spotting, and this was for the entire group. Rough seas warnings, bad storms forecasting, snowstorm forecasting in particular, and lots more. They were given in-depth training on how to individuals that could get them into trouble or situations that could get them into trouble, and how to track and remember specific routes to the rest of the world or across the globe. And for this, they were taught how to use specially developed photographic devices and high-pitched whistles as to how to communicate. And these were whistles that could only be used or heard by Santa's group and no one else outside the group. Okay, so there was a lot to learn. Reindeer, snowbird, and dolphin teams were made senior supervisors, and they had already received training on these special gadgets. At the beginning of October, everyone was introduced to the specially developed sleighs, along with their special suits, shoes, hats, and sea gear. And by mid-October, training was all but complete. Marco, Nicholas, and little Nick had returned to their homes by this time. Santa had decided to give his kids a break for the next few weeks, but he had planned a special event for them at the end of October. And what a surprise it was for everyone. During the break, most of the kids read, rested, played games, and did other fun things. They fraternized with Santa's tutors. For their part, the reindeer had taken time to catch up on some well-deserved sleep. Snowbirds readied their gadgets and relaxed around the compound. Dolphins spent time swimming in the ocean, and the lambs had stayed close to base, just enjoying themselves. As for Santa and Mrs. Claus, they too relaxed, played chess, played card games, and did other fun things as well. And they took long walks around the North Pole, or around their complex at the North Pole. And they enjoyed the fall colors and chatted with their reindeer, snowbirds, dolphins, lambs, and all the other tutors and helpers. They also took bike rides and boat trips, and at night they polished and repolished plans. For the end of the October event, they also were doing preparations for this. And they also were preparing for their Christmas mission. The North Pole complex stayed quite busy, and Santa may have misjudged something that would come back later to bite him. Now we wait to see what happens next. Oh yes, and this is what it was at this present time. Part 4. The Playground Meetup. Preparations had begun to take shape before the Playground Meetup event. Reindeer could be seen decorating the massive playground, while dolphins and snowbirds could be seen rehearsing. And the lambs were kept busy helping the kitchen staff to load trays and lay them out around the playground, while the kids were kept away from it all, in order to create a grand surprise for them. Then the evening was here, and at around 5 p.m., Santa's rich, booming voice came on the intercom, telling the kids to make their way to the playground. They practically fell over each other in doing so, racing each other and laughing with delight as they went. They were greeted by Santa and Mrs. Claus at the doors and given huge bags of treats. The reindeer helped to make sure that the kids stayed focused. As one of Santa's musts was that the kids had to have discipline at all times. Although from time to time he did allow for a bit of straying, but that was it. As the evening progressed, it soon became evident to the kids that this event was going to be a Halloween ball. Santa and Mrs. Claus had obviously dressed up as themselves, but reindeer, dolphins, snowbirds, and lambs had all dressed as Disney characters and clowns. Even the kitchen staff and guards were wearing costumes, and there were some other folks whose faces were unfamiliar, roaming around and chatting with the kids and everyone else. As they would often say, no one is perfect, and everyone is prone to making at least one huge mistake in their lives. And this is exactly what Santa had done on this occasion. However, and upon reflection, Santa had let his guard down for one horrible minute, and the rest had become history. Santa had always made it a tradition to put ads in the local newspapers. Those within comfortable distance of his North Pole complex, and he offered to cater for his special events. And for this occasion, he had done just that. Santa had wanted to give something special to his dedicated security guards, so he had arranged with the chosen caterers to prepare something extraordinarily special for his guards. And boy, was it ever extraordinarily special. And Santa had also wanted to give back to his neighborhoods, often giving opportunities for folks to work at his massive complex. And Santa was eternally grateful for the support that he had received from surrounding neighborhoods. On the afternoon of this special October event that Santa had held for his kids and his tutors, the caterers had arrived in their vans loaded with all kinds of foods for Santa's hundreds of security teams. So the vans had arrived. The food had been unloaded by the caterers, and they had helped to set up tents and tables for the security guards. As Santa and his senior security staff had later reflected, no one had really paid attention to the caterers, as they had set up, served, and mingled, because they too had worn costumes and had blended in very well. But at the same time, they had also done other things. The evening had been a smashing success. The kids had thoroughly enjoyed the shows and loved it best when they were given costumes to wear. They were even asked to come up on stage and encouraged to dance, sing, and just be themselves. The tutors also had lots of fun, just mingling with the kids and with each other. It was more than enough. And they too had been asked to come up on stage and do a little skit, as Santa had prepped them beforehand, that he would ask them to do so. The reindeer had performed high trapeze displays. The snowbirds had pretended to simulate flyby acrobats. The dolphins had done ballet dances, and the lambs had carried out other types of acrobats and dances. And one of their hits was the Reaching for the Moon Lamb Leap. Then the evening had ended with colorful fireworks and Santa and Mrs. Claus giving a sleigh show of their own, culminating in them in their Santa copter handing out special gifts to kids and tutors. And as the caterers mingled and served, they also made sure that other business was taken care of when they were serving the guards. They had spiced up the dishes that they had brought and had put mild zingers into the drinks, making sure that just enough had been added so that the guards would become less alert and more relaxed. And this was how it was at the present time. The guards were now eating and drinking spiced up food and drinks with mild zingers. Part 5. Some hidden watchers and listeners. It was just a stroke of luck that had enabled these caterers to pull off a serious surprise. Far away and across the world from the North Pole, the three wise men, as they called themselves, Santa's constant enemies, and always trying to thwart Santa's special Christmas missions, had somehow read about Santa's ads looking for caterers to cater an end of October event. Then the heads had begun to spin with ideas, and soon they had one. First, they had to find a way to be the caterers to Santa's end of October event, and this had proven much easier than they had ever expected. They had answered Santa's ad, and lo and behold, Santa's team had accepted their application. They had traveled to one of the neighborhoods in disguise, scouted out a bunch of folks looking for work, paid them a boatload of cash, and had told them exactly what they had wanted them to cater. They did indeed provide a very sumptuous feast, and the would-be caterers had been given bottles of spices and told to sprinkle the food and drink liberally, but not too much with the contents of the bottles. They were told that these spices were meant to help enrich the taste of the food and the drink, and the innocent folks had believed it all. On the evening of the event, the three wise men had dressed in clown costumes and had had no problem riding in the vans and then gaining entry to the playground. They came with gadgets to take photos and images, record conversations, take short videos, and much more. They had skillfully hidden their gadgets in the pockets of their costume, which had been sewn into the inner lines of the costumes. Their main mission was simply to gather info and then to go away and use the info to develop ways to destroy some parts of Santa's massive North Pole complex. As the evening wore on, the three wise men could not help but become more and more envious of the festivities and more jealous of the big man in the red suit. They just wanted to destroy Santa Claus forever. The three wise men had managed to capture hundreds of photos and had made multiple mini videos and recording clips. They had also managed to chat with several of the kids and had asked them skillful questions in order to learn what the kids were doing there and how long they were going to be there. The kids had readily answered their questions, not even thinking about who these men were. The three wise men had even managed to find their way to the main foyer of the building and had taken photos of some of the offices, some of the kitchens, and one of the grand dining rooms. They had just decided if they should mount one of the main staircases when they heard voices, and they had hidden in close-by cupboards until the voices had come and gone. Too close for cover. And then they were back outdoors when one of the wise men had noticed a huge red and white building with the words Santa's School written on the front. They had walked quickly to the building and did not have any difficulty entering. And then they had spent a lot of time there taking photos and notes. Several of the kids had chatted with these three wise men about their time being spent at Santa's school. So they had decided that it was a good idea to go into this building. And then it was time to withdraw and return to the playground. The three wise men had almost missed the catering vans as they had started to depart, and had just made it to the back of one of these vans. No one, however, had really paid attention to them, and this is how it was at this time. Part 6: Schedules and Plans. The three wise men journeyed back to their own complex the next day. Their journey was quiet and uneventful, but any observer would quickly notice that these three men were very, very cocky, full of themselves, and eager to succeed against Santa. As for what was going on at Santa's complex the following day, the kids had been given the morning off, but in the afternoon Santa had called a kids' meeting, and kids and tutors had assembled in the large auditorium of the school. Everyone was expectant and excited, and they did not have long to wait. Santa wasted no time in outlining the mission for his kids for this year, the mission that he had titled Kids Helping Kids. Santa told the kids what he was expecting them to do with regard to his Christmas mission for this year, and how he wished for them to carry it out. Santa had briefed his tutors in the morning, so they were already waiting eagerly to spring into action. Santa carefully laid out the schedule, assigned each kid and each tutor to their respective tasks, and then he had left the auditorium, leaving the kids and tutors to start planning for the big mission. The kids were stunned, but simply raring and ready to get started. Most of all, they wanted to please their hero, Santa. Lots of work needed to be done before the actual start date, and Santa had to ensure that his security teams were ready as well, as the success of all of his initiatives depended heavily on the work of his security teams. So while kids and tutors were left to discuss, Santa and Mrs. Claus spent time planning with the security teams and ensuring that they fully understood what was expected of them. Far away and on the opposite side of the world, and far away from the North Pole, others had also started to plan. But there was a marked difference in the two sets of plans. For whereas the North Pole was filled with discussions of how kids were going to help other kids, the other side of the world was busy coming up with ways as how to destroy important parts of the North Pole. The three wise men rose early the following day after returning to their complex. They breakfasted lavishly, went swimming in their large indoor swimming pool, and then they and their cronies had settled down to the business at hand. It did not take very long for this group to decide on a potential target. They believed that they had the info to do what they wanted, plus much more. And now they needed to decide how to carry out their devious mission successfully. The three wise men all felt that it was time for them to score the big victory against Santa. It was long overdue, and it was time to stop Santa from bringing Christmas to the world. They were simply sick of Santa's goodwill and cheer. The three wise men first made the decision to target Santa's school. Then, if they could, they would next go after Santa's guard complex, where the hub of Santa's security was located. The second target would probably be much more difficult. So, it was decided to try for Santa's school. How proud Santa was of his special baby, and how much it would hurt if his school were to be destroyed. Oh yes, the three wise men smiled broadly, with wicked expressions on their faces, and they rubbed their hands with glee at the thought of great success. Oh yes, great glee and delight at the thought of success. Now it was time to get down to serious business. When to do it? By end of third week of November at the latest. And this would not give Santa much time to recover from this big blow. And the three wise men thought that this could be enough to stop Santa dead in his tracks and to force him to postpone this year's Christmas. What exactly to destroy? The school, the dorms, and surrounding school buildings. Take the kids hostage? Only if it was possible. Kill the kids? Only if there was no other alternative. For believe it or not, these thugs were all fathers and cherished their own kids, who had been safely hidden along with their wives, tucked away in the foothills of a very hidden location that not even Santa knew exactly where. But they knew that at the end of the day, Santa could find their families if he really wanted to. As they often say, sometimes when someone is too sure of themselves, they often end up making very simple errors, and these often lead to very serious consequences. And this is how it was at the present time. On to part 7, Santa's spies. On both sides of the world, preparations continued at breakneck speed. At the North Pole, kids, tutors, kitchen staff, security teams, and everybody else, and the clauses too, worked diligently to get things done. Kitchen staff baked overtime, and then they packed baskets, parcels, and boxes. The elves gathered clothes and toys non-stop from Santa's massive underground storage facilities. And then they packed them into strong Rubbermaid boxes and cases. And then the security teams carefully loaded them onto Santa's huge air and sea sleighs and onto massive Land Rovers. There were practically hundreds of thousands of air and sea sleighs to be loaded, along with as many Land Rovers. And there were thousands and thousands of trucks and vans to bring the loads to sleighs and Land Rovers. The security teams also checked and rechecked all of the gadgets aboard the sleighs and Land Rovers. And loaders of these Land Rovers and sleighs worked mainly at night to carry out their jobs, as it was felt that it was more secure to work under the cover of darkness. Everything was coordinated down to the last detail, and Santa and Mrs. Claus and the supervisors worked tirelessly to ensure that all went very smoothly. Santa's brother, Sandy, and his two cousins, Stroyan and Stefan, also came along to help out, and Santa and Mrs. Claus were really pleased to have their family come and visit and to help out. Of course, there were the odd mishaps, but nothing too serious. Santa had everything in hand because, after all, he had been doing this for many, many years. So he had a lot of live practice. He practically did all of this in his sleep and knew what to expect and how to find workarounds whenever he needed to. As for the other side of the world, the three wise men worked full steam ahead with their mission. They had developed a plan to gain entry to Santa's massive North Pole complex. And this, in retrospect, was a very simple plan. They would pose as caterers, similar to the ones that had catered Santa's end of October event. And they would offer to cater another event for Santa, a Thanksgiving event on Thanksgiving Day for Santa's hard-working security staff. They would then use the same strategies as they did for the end of October event, and this would surely gain them entry to their target, Santa's special school. Their plan worked, but not quite. Santa accepted the offer to have this event, as he thought it to be a great idea and gesture, and the three wise men had leapt for joy when they received the good news. Santa did not have any reason to suspect anything, except for one single phone call 2 days before the event. The caterers were ready, but so were others, Snow White and Rose Red, and Batman and Robin. No, not the real characters, but Santa's special spies. These were code names for the real spies, who were always on the watch for anything and everything, who Santa and his team would later reflect caught a very lucky break just 2 days before the Thanksgiving event, when a phone conversation was intercepted between one of the three wise men and one of their staff. It was time for Snow White and Rosewed and Batman and Robin to do what they did best. That was to thwart any potential danger and to protect Santa and his family and the North Pole. Batman and Robin, aka Marco and Nicholas, had set up special devices to monitor the area around Santa's North Pole complex. The devices were capable of listening to activities up to about 100 miles around the complex, and they were extremely clear and powerful. They could pick up both video and audio and relay everything live to Marco and Nicholas, who were stationed thousands of miles away at their homes in Bobbin Square, located in a far-off country. Early on the Tuesday evening, just before Thanksgiving, Batman and Robin had started to pick up some very soft beeps, and then the beeps had begun to grow louder, and they knew that something was afoot. They hurried to their respective consoles, sat down, and there they waited. Soon they were receiving both audio and video, and Marco was describing the images to Nicholas, who was following along on his braille display. They could see a large white catering van parked close to the gates of Santa's complex, with the words Country Catering stenciled in red on the sides, the back, and the front of the van. And then they began to hear the conversation between one of the wise men and one of the staff, with the wise man giving instructions for the staff to make sure that spices were sprinkled liberally over the food and drink before they were served. The two knew immediately that this was not good, but before alerting Santa, they wanted to see and hear more. The van had stayed in the same spot for the entire night, and Nicholas had managed to discover the location of the one who had made the call. The caller was located in a close-by hotel, and now it was time to act. Marco and Nicholas contacted Snow White and Rosewed, aka Santa's very special mermaids, Jamie and Mallory, who you met in a previous episode. And soon they were on their way from the very secret base. Their mission? To enter the hotel where the caller was staying and to find a way to immobilize what was about to take place. Jamie and Mallory hastily packed their very special gear and alerted their stations along the way to be on the lookout for them as they traveled and to stay ready. Then they set out, and by the time that they had reached the hotel, the plan was in place. And this is how it was at the present time. Part 8. Santa changes course. Jamie and Mallory were indeed very special spies. Their base was known only to Santa and Mrs. Claus, and their fellow mermaids were scattered in secret bases around the world, so that they were always ready to act and to help Jamie and Mallory to carry out their special missions for Santa at any time. Jamie and Mallory entered the hotel, prepared a tray of drinks and snacks bought from the hotel's bar, and then they had quietly mounted the steps, the carpeted steps to the 3rd floor, where they knocked softly at room 303, and they identified themselves as room service, telling the person inside the room that they had a tray for him, compliment of the hotel manager. The occupant opened the door, and there in the doorway stood the wise man who had made the call, totally taken in by the beauty of these two so-called staff members. Jamie and Mallory then engaged the wise man in idle chit-chat, set the tray down on the table, and then had served the wise man, and he told them that he had been expecting 2 friends very shortly, and he wanted to wait for their arrival. No worries. Jamie and Mallory left the room, but stationed themselves outside the room so that they could see when the other 2 friends had arrived, and they made sure to hide themselves. They did not have to wait very long. Events moved very, very swiftly after this. Jamie's and Mallory's snacks and drinks contained some very potent sleeping pills. The 3 wise men had eaten, drank, and soon they were knocked out. Then, when they had felt that the pills had worked their magic, the mermaids had entered the room and had found and photographed the relevant information, leaving the sleeping wise men to wake hours later. They then sent their photographs off to Marco and Nicholas, and they then took care of the rest of business. Of course, Santa was eternally grateful to his spies. Now, Santa needed to change course. When the 3 wise men had arrived in their catering vans on Thanksgiving Day, they were met by lines and lines of hundreds and hundreds of teddy bears, all dressed as wise men, standing tall and proud. The jig was up, and the 3 wise men knew it. They quickly withdrew and drove away, knowing once more that Santa had won. Santa was not going to take any chances, and he had enough time to alter his plans. First, he and Mrs. Claus had shared what had happened with the family and the security team. Then he called an emergency meeting with the family and the security team, and also included the tutors, making sure that the meeting room was swept thoroughly for any bugs before the meeting commenced. Marco and Nicholas, along with Jamie and Mallory, were also in attendance. Marco and Nicholas attended virtually, and Jamie and Mallory were there in person. The beating had lasted for quite a while. The kids never knew what had taken place, and some of the reindeer kept them occupied while the meeting was going on. At the end of the day, Santa and his team had developed a new plan for their Christmas initiative, and in truth and in fact, it turned out that this plan was even more elaborate and more exciting. That night, the kitchen staff had prepared a very sumptuous dinner for everyone. And as they prepared for bed, Santa and Mrs. Claus had thanked God that once more they had managed to save Christmas, and now his kids were going to help other kids and bring them lots of joy and cheer and blessings of Christmas. The original Christmas initiative was supposed to have included sleighs in the skies, sleighs in the sea, and maybe sleighs on land. Now this was changed, and Santa had told the kids on the evening of Thanksgiving, after they had enjoyed a delicious Thanksgiving dinner. And this is how it was at the present time. Part 9. Santa's Students at Sea. It is now December 23rd, and everything is finally ready for the big takeoff. And it is all under the tightest of security. Santa is ready to give the signal for launch. Each student kid is at their respective post. Each tutor is also positioned and poised, and everyone else is ready and awaiting the signal from the big man. Santa stands on a huge podium in the middle of the massive playground, and he is surrounded by Mrs. Claus and his family. Marco and Nicholas are watching virtually from afar, and Jamie and Mallory are also following from their secret base. Santa slowly raises his arm, and the signal is given, and everything is ready. The whistles, worn by everyone involved, emits a high-pitched sound heard only by each person wearing the whistle around their neck on a thick gold chain. And on the front of the whistle is Santa's special emblem. The whistle itself is a pure 21-karat gold whistle, and the emblem is in the bright red color, Santa's special color, on a white background. Every kid who has attended Santa's special school receives one of these special whistles before they leave the school. Santa watches with absolute delight as each sea sleigh begins to move, and sleighs from all around the world begin to move simultaneously on the seas, and Santa can see it all on his large jumbo screens, which are all placed around the massive playground. Santa, Mrs. Claus, and his family all begin to cheer, and it takes about an hour before the final sleigh is seaborne. Santa scratches his thick white beard and smiles broadly at all of those around him. Then he and Mrs. Claus retire to their apartment to settle down for the night, or at least to try to do so. And Marco and Nicholas raise their glasses of bubbly, while throughout the rest of the house, the families bustle around, preparing for Christmas Day. Occasionally, the kids enter the office and look quizzically at the monitors around the room. They stay for a few minutes, but then they return to their own activities outside the room. Then they are taken outdoors to play with the neighborhood kids. Jamie and Mallory also raise their glasses of champagne as they sit at their marble table on their balcony, watching the fantastic launch and smiling with delight, occasionally glancing at a very calm sea below, and each of them praying for good weather for the sleighs and kids. The two mermaids have spent time cooking up a storm of their own, and they will now proceed to enjoy it. They are expecting other mermaids later on. for after dinner tea, coffee, cakes, and cookies. For the most part, the C's are behaving, but everyone knows that this will probably not last for the entire time. In general, the night skies are clear, but there are banks of fog in other parts of the world where the sleighs are sailing. And there are also some very serious snowstorms taking place in some of the countries where the sleighs are supposed to visit. But Santa is sure that the kids and tutors could handle it all. In some parts of the world, it is either mid-morning or mid-afternoon, and the sun is either attempting to shine brightly or is indeed shining brightly. And in other parts of the world, it is either twilight or full nighttime. Santa and NORAD have had an arrangement for many years now, where NORAD keeps an eye out for Santa's sleighs, and they lend assistance if required. The sleighs move smoothly and quietly. Reindeer drivers are at the helm. Elf helpers are handing out snacks and drinks. Student kids are checking and rechecking their gadgets under the watchful eyes of their tutors. As they travel, they see large schools of fishes who stand and salute the sleighs as they go by. And they do this with their fins and tails. The kids and others return their waves and salutes. And then there are the seabirds who raise their flapping wings in salute. And many of the kids marvel at the sheer beauty of both fishes and kids. And they are left to wonder, how do these fishes and birds know about them? Do they know where they are sailing to? The stars also salute the sleighs as they go by, winking and blinking at the sleighs, and doing their own star dances, to the delight of the kids and everyone else. Even the moon does her thing, shining brightly to light up the seas around the sleighs. And not to be outdone, the sun sends golden rays upon the sleighs. Then the reindeer show commences during or midway during the journey. And this is where Santa's specially trained reindeer team puts on a show never to be forgotten. Reindeer and kids combine to play air hockey, air soccer, air acrobats, and all kinds of other air activities. They do air dances as well, and air skating acrobats. The kids have all been trained for this particular event ever since they had started school. And now it is time to show off their skills. And as the sleighs sail along, the shows continue. But then everyone receives a signal that it is time for the final segment of the trip to take place. Santa's rich, booming voice is heard loud and clear on the sleighs, as at the same time as they all prepare to do a land. It is time to get down to the big business at hand. Each individual sleigh receives a special signal from Santa, directing them to dock and to start the final phase of their mission. And this is how it was at this time. Part 10. Santa's drones and electronic birds. This was probably going to be the trickiest part of Santa's mission. And for the most part, it was up to the kids and tutors to make this work. Of course, Santa's reindeer, elves, and helpers were on standby. And they also ended up helping the kids with hundreds of thousands of sea slaves stationed along sea coasts of the world. And now Santa's drones and electronic birds were ready for action. And Santa had spared no expense to make everything right. Unmanned drones had started to take off from the sleighs, traveling invisibly to those targets that were previously predetermined for drop-offs. And kids, tutors, elves, and helpers all combined to manage these very special drones that had recently been developed by Marco and Nicholas, along with some very high-powered technical teams. The drones had performed magnificently and had no problem managing their drop-offs. They had found their targets without any difficulty, and kids on the ground were absolutely surprised when they saw packages and parcels unexpectedly dropping from the skies and landing at their feet and around them. They never heard the drones coming or leaving. Only the sound of ho, ho, ho could be heard after the packages and parcels had been delivered. The electronic birds had also been developed by Marco and Nicholas, and these birds had been equipped with photographic memories and programmed to drop packages and parcels down chimneys and as close as possible to their targets. Santa's electronic birds wore special suits of electronic feathers, and what made these birds unique was that to the naked eye they were invisible, but they were dressed in varying colors of white, red, gold, and green. The red birds dropped parcels and packages down the chimneys of homes. The white birds dropped packages and parcels at hospitals and orphanages for kids. The green birds dropped their loot at soup kitchens and food banks for parents and kids. And the gold birds had dropped their loot at kindergartens, nurseries, and schools. And like the unmanned drones, they too had emitted the sound of ho, ho, ho after they had dropped off their parcels and packages. Santa and his team, his family and Mrs. Claus, had watched with absolute glee and delight as the drones and birds had done their thing, and he was very pleased to see how his kids had performed, expertly handling the Santa drones, and Marco and Nicholas had smiled with delight to see how their special devices were being used. As for Santa's kids, they could not seem to sit still as they performed their special tasks, and the reindeer and elves had to keep them focused a lot of the time. This was a mammoth operation that had spread globally. So many things could have gone wrong, but on the whole, it was a roaring success. After the drones had delivered the parcels and packages, they had magically disappeared into thin air. But the Santa birds had all returned to the sleighs, and then they had been programmed to return to the North Pole to be put in storage. Those kids who received packages and parcels first had to get over their total surprises before they were able to recover and open them. And as midnight had begun to strike around the world, Santa's very high-profile best friend, investigative reporter Josh Reisman, put the finishing touches to the project's huge success. And this is how it was at this time. Part 11. As the World Watched. The world had been caught totally off guard, and almost every TV station in the developed world, as well as many of those in the developing world and the third world, switched to what was going on in their country. Screens were filled with packages and parcels, unexpectedly raining down from the skies. Images also showed packages and parcels magically sliding down chimneys with no one in sight. Who could have done this? Images also showed practically millions of kids from the Ukraine to Africa, America to Australia, Afghanistan to Egypt, Japan to Brazil, England to Canada, Spain to Italy, and India to China, and even in Russia and Iran, being inundated with mystery parcels and packages that were of all sizes and of all colors. Nurses and doctors hurried forward to help kids to open their packages and parcels at hospitals. Staff at orphanages did the same. Those in soup kitchens and food banks could not believe their eyes, and they stood there with open mouths. But soon they had begun to smile and laugh. Many could be seen crying openly for joy, leaping with delight and hugging each other. So many did not even know each other as they hugged and greeted. And the millions of kids, nothing could have described the plethora of expressions plastered on their faces. The news media was quick to report that this was no terrorist attack, no reason to fear any sort of thing. Packages and parcels were completely void of bombs. Then NORAD broke in by stating that it was probably Santa's doing. Yes, the big man was probably behind all of this. The internet was inundated with images and inquiries. And at one time, the internet almost crashed. Social media was literally going bonkers. Most headlines had started to display the words, "Joy to the world," and "Thank you to those who ever did this." And the headlines and images continued to pour in for days to come. No one could have believed what had taken place starting on that Christmas Eve. Church bell rang out for days. Soup kitchens and food banks were simply overflowing with food. World leaders took to the air to pontificate and comment. Almost everybody or everyone had something to say. The images of parcels and packages magically falling from the skies everywhere and in every country around the world was an event that no one could have ever been able to understand, let alone to explain. Food, clothes, toys, medical supplies, and so much more, all for the kids of the world. Their futures would be assured. That was it. And the adults were not forgotten. Worldwide starvation was probably over for the next few decades. Not even the Pope or any other religious leader had an answer to this. It was early Christmas morning at the North Pole, and as Santa relaxed in his Santa's chair, sipping on hot cocoa and munching on chocolate chip cookies, he and Mrs. Claus yawned and smiled broadly at each other. It was time for bed. The Clauses and their families still had a full day ahead. And Santa could not wait to unveil his final Christmas surprise for this year. While thousands of miles away on the other side of the world, 3 grumpy wise men sat sulking and grumping at each other, and they were fuming, vowing to each other that Santa would never get away with this. And this is how it was at this present time. Part 12. Christmas Day at the North Pole. Santa had instructed everyone to sleep in, as he had wanted to do the same. Santa was very, very tired, and his back was starting to bother him. Besides, he had started to feel as if a cold was beginning to creep in on him. It was a very cold mid-Christmas morning when the North Pole finally began to stir. Of course, the kids had been the first to stir, and loud whoops could be heard coming from their dorms, as they had found loads of presents waiting for them at the foot of their beds. Despite most of them being tired and sleepy-eyed, they managed to somehow drag themselves out of their beds and down to a huge brunch. And there waiting for them was Santa, Mrs. Claus, and the Santa family, tutors and elves. But not before they had managed to open many of their presents. A lot of gadgets, snazzy clothes, books, board games, and other types of building kits and model kits as well. And there was sporting paraphernalia. The little girls also received such gifts like doll houses of fancy furniture, tea sets, makeup kits, and all kinds of other little kits. And they also got sewing and knitting kits, while the little boys received such gifts as fishing rods, model games, and shipbuilding sets, model planes sets, and anything like that, balls and basketballs and Meccano sets. This memorable day at the North Pole was marked by some very memorable surprises. And as Santa later confided to Mrs. Claus, he was not sure who was more surprised, he and Mrs. Claus, or the kids, or the tutors, or the reindeer, or the elves, or their helpers. The kids had presented Santa and Mrs. Claus with a helicopter that they had built all on their own, with help from their tutors and Marco and Nicholas. This helicopter was especially equipped with special guiding gadgets, seats for reclining and relaxing, and it also had a retractable roof that could be rolled back on sunny days. Most of all, the Santa copter, as it was called, could be put on autopilot and programmed to fly almost anywhere within a 2,000-mile range. The Santa copter could be made to appear invisible, or it could remain visible. Finally, the kids had made special Santa suits to be worn when riding in the Santa copter. Santa was overwhelmed with pride and emotion, and he and Mrs. Claus had tears in their eyes as they thanked and hugged each kid and each tutor. Marco and Nicholas would get their reward much later. Then Santa had his own surprise for the kids and the tutors, and finally for his reindeer. The kids knew that within a few days Santa would be sending them back to their homelands, as had been discussed when they had arrived at first to the North Pole. And for their mission, many had begged Santa to let them stay longer. But Santa had only nodded his head sadly in response. Santa first handed out surprises to his tutors. A special drone for each of the tutors. And these drones were equipped with photographic memories, electronic maps, and guiding devices. And the tutors could use them wherever they chose to. The elves and helpers each received a mini sleigh of their own, with similar functions and gadgets to the drones. Then it was the turn of the reindeer. Santa gave each reindeer the keys to specially made motorcycles and cars. They were dubbed reindeer cars and reindeer motorcycles. And they could drive these around the massive North Pole. Then it was time for him to give the kids their surprise, one that they would never forget, and one for a lifetime. And as Santa's elves and helpers brought in folders, the kids had grown very silent and expectant. Then Santa had unveiled the contents of the folders. Each folder contained papers for each kid, and they were legal documents whereby Santa and Mrs. Claus had agreed to adopt each of them as of now. The Clauses were the legal guardians of each of these kids. There was complete silence. Then Rudolph had broken it all with a loud ho, ho, ho. The end. I hope you enjoyed this special episode of mine, episode 3. It's all about Santa's special kids. I hope you're enjoying your holiday. I wish you a very, very lovely holiday time. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, just remember to share peace and joy and greetings with each other. Take care now, and we'll see you again very soon. Ho, ho, ho.